The first thing Jake Hollister saw was something dark lying in the middle of the grass. At first, he thought it was a dead deer, but when his horse got closer, he froze right in the saddle. It was a woman. A young nun in a black habit, stretched out under the burning Kansas sun. Jake jumped off his horse so fast the dust rose like smoke. He dropped to one knee beside her. Her feet were bare. They were cut and dusty, every toe streaked with dried blood. Her habit smelled of sweat and sun-baked cloth, the sharp mix of fear and heat that told Jake she had been running for a long time under that cruel sky. Jake touched her wrist to check for a pulse. The skin was hot, burning hot, like she had walked miles through the heat with no rest at all. Her lips moved just a little, a whisper so faint he thought it was the wind. "That is forbidden." He leaned in. She whispered it again. This time her voice trembled like she was afraid even of the words leaving her mouth. Jake had seen a lot in his 52 years, from droughts to gunfights and hard winters, but he had never seen a nun collapsed and alone in the prairie with fear written all over her face. Her eyes opened halfway, blue and unfocused. They were scared and lost, but underneath the fear was an old hurt that had been carried for a long time. Jake lifted her head gently and felt the heat coming off her skin. Heat like fever. When he touched her shoulder to look for injuries, she whispered it again. "That is forbidden," not like a warning, more like a plea. And Jake understood. She was not scared of him. She was scared of rules, of judgment, of whatever punishment a young nun might face for letting a rancher lay a hand on her, even if he was trying to save her life. Jake pulled out his bandana, dipped it into his water skin, and placed it on her forehead. She flinched at first, then relaxed, almost melting into the touch of something cool for the first time in who knows how long. Far off in the distance, he heard hooves. If someone from town found her like this, lying in his arms, it would not end well for her. Or maybe even for him. Jake slid one arm under her knees and one behind her back. He lifted her carefully, and she leaned against his chest like she had no strength left to fight anything. He could feel how light she was in his arms, and he knew there was a story behind it. Whatever had driven a nun into the middle of the Kansas prairie, and it was not something small, but as he carried her toward his horse, one question kept nagging him. What could be so forbidden that it drove a young nun into the middle of the Kansas prairie? Jake rode slow, keeping one arm steady around the young nun so she would not slide off his horse. She stayed quiet the whole ride, breathing shallow, her head resting lightly against his chest. By the time they reached the small creek near the Hollister ranch, Jake realized something strange. She had not fought him, not even when she woke halfway and saw she was being carried by a man she had never met. Her fingers had tightened on his shirt like she was holding on to the last safe thing in the world. He stepped off the horse and carried her inside his cabin. It was a simple place, wood walls, a pot on the stove, and a Bible on the table he had not read as often as he promised himself. He laid her gently on his bed. Jake soaked the cloth and placed it on her forehead. She stirred, eyes fluttering open just enough to see where she was. Relief, a slow kind of relief that said she had not felt safe in a long time. He gave her water. She took a small sip, then another. Her voice was soft when she finally spoke. "Where am I?" Jake pulled up a chair beside her. "Hollister Ranch, couple miles west of Dodge City. You passed out cold in the grass." She nodded, like she expected that answer and knew she had pushed herself past her limits. "My name's Jake," he said. "What is yours?" It was like even her own name was something she had to guard. Then she whispered, "Sister Elise." Jake nodded slowly. "Elise, then." She looked around the little cabin, her fingers curling into the blanket. He saw clearly this woman was running from something heavier than the heat that had knocked her down. She tried to sit up. Jake gently held her shoulder. "Take it easy. No one is coming for you here." Fear flickered there, quick and sharp. Not fear of him. Fear of being found. She swallowed hard. "Jake, if they ask about me, you must say you never saw me." Jake leaned back, eyebrows raised. Who exactly is coming after a nun in the middle of a Kansas summer?" Elise looked toward the door like someone might walk in any second. Then she whispered the words that made Jake's whole body tense. "Jake, I did not run from God. I ran from the people inside the church. What in the world could a nun have seen that was so dangerous she had to flee for her life? Jake sat back in his chair, studying the young woman in his bed like she had just told him the world was flat. Running from God was one thing. Running from the church itself was a whole different storm. Elise pulled the blanket tighter around her shoulders and stared at her hands. They were shaking. Jake kept his voice steady and calm, the same voice he used with skittish horses. You can tell me no one else is here. She took a shaky breath back at the mission in Dodge City. Things were not holy anymore. Jake felt something cold settle in his stomach. He knew that mission was supposed to be a place folks trusted. Elise looked up with eyes that held more truth than she wanted to carry. There is a man there, a man everyone respects. But he is not who they think he is. He let her speak at her own pace. She swallowed hard. He's using the mission for money, for things no one should ever hide behind a cross. Jake felt the heat rise in his chest, the quiet kind of anger older men know well, the slow burn that comes from seeing someone use faith as a shield for their own dirt. I found letters, books with numbers that make no sense. I told one of the older sisters, and the next morning she was gone. Jake leaned forward. Gone where? Elise shook her head. They told me she left on her own, but I saw the sheriff speaking to Father Whitlock that same night, and after that, he started watching me, following me, and asking where I slept, where I prayed. Jake rubbed a hand across his jaw. Sheriff Collins, a man Jake never trusted, a man who smelled like trouble even when he tried to look holy. I knew if I stayed, I would disappear too. So I slipped onto a freight wagon heading out of town and rode it as far as the river. Then I walked until my legs gave out. And that is how you found me. Her voice cracked on that last sentence, and for the first time since he found her, Elise began to cry, those quiet, tired tears that come when a person has held everything in for too long. Jake stayed in his chair, hands clasped, letting her cry without looking away. You know, I once kept my mouth shut when I should have spoken. My wife needed a doctor, and the man in town turned us away because we could not pay enough. I walked out of that office without saying a word. She died 2 days later. I have had to live with that silence every day since. So believe me when I tell you this. If you are brave enough to speak, I am not going to let you stand there alone. Jake stood up and went to the window, staring out at the quiet land. He had spent years minding his own business, but hearing what this girl had gone through brought back something he thought he had buried with his wife, a need to protect and to make things right. Elise, if what you're saying is true, then this is bigger than both of us. I know, but I cannot go back alone. Jake stepped closer, eyes steady. You will not while I'm breathing. Now the real fight was coming, the kind that shakes a whole town. If you are still with me, friend, I hope you hit that subscribe button so you do not miss what happens next. Grab a cup of tea or coffee, settle in, and tell me in the comments what time it is for you right now and where you're listening from. 2 mornings later, Jake woke before sunrise. It was one of those quiet Kansas mornings when even the wind seemed to hold its breath. He stepped outside, boots sinking lightly into the cool dirt, and scanned the horizon. Inside the cabin, Elise was awake too. She sat at the table, hands wrapped around a cup of warm water. Jake sat across from her. All right, he said. We need answers. She nodded. If Father Whitlock knows I escaped, he will send others. He will not give up. We are going into town. Her eyes widened. Into Dodge City. Jake nodded. If the man is dirty, folks need to see the truth with their own eyes. Elise took a shaky breath. What if they see me? Jake smiled a little, the kind of smile only a stubborn older rancher can manage. Then let them look. You have nothing to be ashamed of. They rode out together. Jake handed her an old trail hat from the peg by the door before they left. It was sun-faded and a little too big, but when she pulled the brim low over her brow, it hid half her face and gave her just enough courage to keep going. The prairie stretched wide and golden, heat rising already even though the morning was still young, and by the time the roofs of Dodge City appeared, Elise was gripping the saddle tighter than she meant to, cowboys tying up horses, and right in the center, The mission house stood tall